Welcome to the Westside Investors Network, WIN, your community of investing knowledge for growth. This is the Real Estate Professionals Investing Podcast for real estate professionals by real estate professionals. This show is focused on the next step in your career, investing. Thank you for listening, and please, if you like our content, rate us on your podcast provider. And now, your hosts, AJ and Chris Shepard.
Today, we've got Gary Komenaka on the line with us. Gary's a seasoned investor that survived the crash of 2008-2009. In this show, he's willing to share his mistakes that we can all benefit from avoiding. We also touch on how important it is to partner with great operators. So let's get started. Hey, we got Gary Komenaka here. He's living over in Hawaii and mostly a retired investor, or still invests actively in stuff, but definitely more passively than most. And Gary, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Gary Komenaka. Like you said, I live in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm actually a full-time practicing dentist, so I do have a day job, but I guess I'm a part-time real estate investor on the side. And I started investing back in about 2002, and I'm sure we'll kind of get into a little bit more, but I've tried to do a lot of different things. I kind of got killed in the crash in, 08, 09 area, kind of held on for dear life. Kind of made it through some rough times and then started reinvesting again about 2015, 16. And I mostly do long-term investing now, or out-of-state investing, because Hawaii is a pretty expensive place to invest in. So I do have some properties here, but I do most of my investing in other states now. So I mostly focus on like single family or small multifamilies. I have some properties in Oregon, in Memphis, Tampa, Houston, and then I just recently got involved in a couple apartment syndications. So those are in Alabama. Those are like 3 pretty big complexes. And then I also do some kind of like crowdfunding through my self-directed IRA. And then just recently at our local high school, I started, starting to do a little bit of teaching to high school students, which I think is super cool. I mean, it's just been a few semesters, and I don't have like my own class, but I think
what a great way to give back. That's amazing.
Right.
That's awesome.
Right.
Well, wonderful. It sounds like you're in a lot of different types of real estate, so that's very good. So like, how did you get started? Like what was the first kind of like impetus to like get into real estate?
Yeah, so I think I got started probably similar to a lot of other investors. I had already graduated from dental school. I was living in Portland. This was probably about 2002. And one of my friends gave me the book Rich Dad Poor Dad to read. And, I was pretty classically educated. Obviously, I made it through dental school. But Rich Dad Poor Dad was just, obviously it opens your mind to a different way of thinking. And shortly thereafter, this financial planner that I was kind of working with, he also gave me the book Multiple Streams of Income by Robert Allen to read. And the only reason I mentioned Robert Allen is because shortly after I read that book, there was a quote unquote Creating Wealth with Real Estate Robert Allen seminar in Portland. And this is back in 2002 when there wasn't nearly as much information available online as there is today. So I actually had to take off work and paid $5,000 to go to a 3-day real estate seminar. But I mean, that was a lot then. It's still a lot now, but that definitely got me going. And then after that, I used to go to a lot of local seminars that were held by realtors or other agents. And then I joined the Northwest Real Estate Investors Association, which is a local, or in Portland, it's a local real estate investors club, which was super informative. And it was like people say, it was like the Wild West back then. I mean, people would bring deals to the meetings and people would be picking up deals left and right at these monthly meetings. But that's kind of how I got started.
Nice. Did you partner with anyone on any of those deals or make some good connections?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the best things about the meetings was it was easy to make connections because I didn't really know people in the area and not from Portland. Like I mentioned, I was a practicing dentist, so I didn't have any contacts in the industry. But then, when you go to the meetings, there's 50 people, and there's pretty much everyone, you needed a lender or a contractor or whatever. They're all there. And then the association also had a list of contacts. I found my tax accountant who I still use today, and then I had to use an attorney once for an eviction and that type of thing. So it was just a very good resource to find different people in the industry that obviously as investors, we are always looking for.
Having resources is absolutely important, no matter what part of real estate you're doing. So kind of digging more into like, how did you get into like real estate? Were your parents ever involved in real estate, or have they, I don't know, shaped or helped you in any way with doing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. My dad was actually a realtor when he was like a part-time realtor when I was growing up, but he actually didn't really do much in investing. And I was kind of thinking about this before, and I think part of the reason I kind of got into it is, I don't know if a lot of young people realize, but when you go to college, everything's really fun. You're seeing your friends all the time, but then when you actually get into the workforce, you work from, let's say, 8 to 5, you go home, you eat dinner, you work out or whatever, you get up, you go to work and you see like the same 5 people every day, and you do the same thing over and over and over again, but you don't really see your friends because everybody's working. And then after a couple of weeks, I remember thinking to myself, there's no way that I can just do this for like 40 years. I mean, really, like all my life is I'm going to just live in this office and come home and by myself. And I mean, it was just, I needed some other outlet. And I think the nice thing about real estate, I mean, Rich said for that definitely gets you into a different mindset. And I think just the whole real estate industry, so many different things you can do. You're always learning. It's exciting. I mean, no two deals are alike. There's a lot of problem solving involved. So it's not like you're doing like some mindless activity, right? It's not like you're playing a video game.
Oh, yeah.
Through some rum. I mean, you're solving people's problems. You're trying to figure out how to make the deal work. There's so many different things, like from single family or to apartment complexes, or I mean, commercial real estate, which I'm not super into right now. But I mean, there's just so many options. And I remember telling my mom when I'm going to work as a dentist, I never am like so excited that I can't sleep. I mean, I just go to sleep and go to work. But I remember telling her whenever I'm working on some real estate deal, I could literally be lying in bed and I just cannot sleep because all I'm thinking about is, hey, how do I make the deal work? What does the seller want? Or how am I going to do the financing? And thinking of all the different options to try and make some kind of deal work. And I was just once I kind of got started. So
cool.
But that's how I first got started. I went to a local real estate seminar that was about like duplexes. It was focusing on duplexes and quads, and shortly thereafter I bought a duplex. That's kind of how I got my first property.
Great. So we had talked a little bit earlier, and you said that you had kind of started acquiring in 2002, but then you had some struggles during the crash of like 2007 to 2010. What do you want to share a little bit more about kind of like what you learned from that time or what happened?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I got caught up in the same thing that a lot of people did. Was lenders were doing a lot of 100% financing, and obviously that was my mistake for getting over leveraged. But I had several properties that I bought with 100% financing, and so the first loans were usually like 80%, and the second loans were usually the kind of the killer ones where they would have like adjustable rate mortgages and fixed for a certain amount of time or pretty high interest rates. So a lot of these properties, I bought, like, let's say I bought a property for like 150 grand, but I 100% financed it. And let's say the payments were like 1,200 a month and the rent was 1,200 a month. On paper, it kind of looks like it's okay as long as the property is. But then when the market crashed and the property now is worth like 130, and then the payments started fluctuating because the interest rates were moving, then let's say you're paying like 1,300 a month and now you're renting it for 1,200 a month and you're losing money every month plus, and that's not even taking into account vacancy and repairs. So I had, obviously a few of these that were going on, and once you start going backwards, it sort of snowballs on you. So now I had maybe like 4 or 5 of these that were kind of underwater and I'm just like losing money on. I mean, there was one condo that I had that it was being built in the waterfront, where in downtown Portland. And I think I bought it for like $275. And then my payments were something like $2,000 a month. And there was like a $500 housing association fee on it. And I was renting it for like $1,095. So after property management fee, I'm losing like $1,500 per month. Not just one property, but it was just for about 5 years, I would say, when the market was crashing. It just was kind of like quote on for dear life. And I had since moved out of the Portland area, so I was living in the Bay Area, which is pretty expensive. And I was making decent money, but I would definitely say it was super, super stressful. I also had a couple properties on lease options, which were kind of nice because those I could just kind of let the options expire without exercising them versus having loans tied to them, because the underwater properties, if you owe more than the property's worth, then you can't really even sell it. So you're kind of stuck. And I guess I was kind of lucky in that I only had like maybe 4 or 5 of these, because, there's people that had hundreds of these and they kind of got killed. I mean, I went through some rough times, but I was actually able to make it through without, really defaulting on payments and stuff. So that condo actually found an agent who short sold it for me for like 150 grand, which I don't know how she did that, but ended up paying like 4,000 or 5,000 to get out of that one, which I still have no clue how she did it. But
that's pretty awesome. My guess is that affected your credit a little bit.
Yes, for like 7 years, I just short sell on it. But it wasn't in default, but it definitely taking my credit. But I was just happy to, it was like a cloud that was lifted off my shoulders.
I can imagine.
So if you're talking to a bunch of like newer investors, like what are some of the concepts that like living through that kind of era and that time that you really like took away from those deals that you mentioned?
Yeah, so one thing that I would say is definitely, leverage there's pros and cons. It's good because you can get in with maybe less money down, but definitely I would be careful. They don't do those 100% financing loans now, but even in the portfolio that I have now, I know a lot of people talk about doing, like burring in and out of properties and putting loans on all the properties you have, but I'm more careful now not to have loans tied to all my properties, because back then I had maybe like 10 properties or whatever, but I had loans, and some properties I have 2 loans on single properties, and there's just so much that goes along with all the loans. So now I have about 25 units, but I think like 10 of them are paid off, so there's no loans attached to them, and I kind of like that ratio better. So I think leverage is definitely good in that you can leverage your money and buy more property, but I would also say just be careful not to get too over leveraged, because you never know when there's going to be market corrections. And the interesting thing that I found was that listening to podcasts and all that, there's a lot of like really, really experienced investors who didn't see the crash coming either. Obviously I was a fairly new investor and I had no idea. I don't even know if I knew what was happening while it was happening, but there's a lot of really experienced investors that I was surprised that they didn't even know it was coming. So if they can't predict it, then I don't know if anybody really can. So I would just say to just be careful using leverage. It's definitely can be used, but don't go too crazy with it. But that's what I've learned, and I'm trying to keep my loans kind of under a little more moderate and not have loans tied to all my properties now.
Do you look for a certain amount of cash flow on a property, or?
Right. So now, in the properties that I'm looking for now, I'm kind of looking around that sort of 1% rural range. I tend to look for tenants or properties where tenants are paying about $1,000 of rent or more, because I was talking to a couple agents and, they were saying that if tenants are paying like $500 a month, then a lot of those tenants will be a little lower income tenants, or they may not take as good care of the property, versus tenants who are paying $1,000 or more. They tend to be a little bit more stable and maybe a little more stable in the neighborhood, and a lot of dual income families. So he was telling me that anything if they're paying over about $1,000 a month or more, that's like a pretty decent area. And actually I use a lot of HELOCs now to purchase properties. So a lot of the properties I'm purchasing, I've bought some single families just off of a HELOC, and then I just pay the HELOC off, with like Velocity Banking, kind of using the HELOC as a checking account. So I have 2 properties in Hawaii that I currently have HELOCs off of, and then I run a lot of my financing off of the HELOCs. As far as cash numbers, I try to get about $1,000 a month, but without taking into account all the vacancy and stuff. Just I figure that's a pretty decent spread. But I would say that I'm more of a macro guy. I don't get too lost in all the numbers, which is probably, I probably make some mistakes, but I just try not to get too paralyzed by analyzing everything. So I'm more of a macro guy, which is probably good and bad. That's kind of how I work.
So if you had kind of a gut feeling about what your portfolio loan to value is and like where you want it to be, having gone through, kind of a loan to value crisis with your previous portfolios, what are you aiming for? Just so that you could be ready for the market to turn?
And that's a great question. I probably should know the number off the top of my head, but I would say probably, in the 70% or less would probably be reasonably safe. I think, market correction of maybe like 20% would be pretty high. I would say that's pretty far to go. But also I think as long as the rental numbers are, above your mortgage payments, as long as you're renting for a decent amount above your mortgage, then the rental market would have to crash and the sales market would have to crash in order for you to start losing money. So because I have a fair amount of properties that don't have loans on them, I kind of feel pretty comfortable. But as far as exact percent, I would say maybe like 70%. I think that would be comfortable. I think if the market crashes like 50% and the rental market crashes like 50%, then I think the country's probably got some other issues.
There's some bigger problems out there.
Right,
yeah, definitely. Portland right now is kind of going through the worst rental market crash that I can find. I was researching this last night, and rents have gone down 6% in Multnomah County, and that's certainly interesting, but in the suburbs, it's way better. But this is kind of like a 10-year low. So it's very interesting because values are at an all-time high and rents, have just had the biggest drop ever. Well, not ever, but as far as I can find in Portland. But another question. So leading up to the crash, do you think that either fear or greed had any, influence on your decision making?
Probably greed. Financing was so easy to come by, and it was easy to get caught up in everybody buying property. And when you go to real estate meetings, everybody's like talking about how many properties they have, and you go talk to lenders and they're always saying, oh yeah, we can get you 100% financing on this. And as far as fear, I don't know about fear, but I would say I'm sure greed took some part in it. And like I said, I definitely made mistakes. I'm not blaming the crash or anything. Over the years, I've sort of had to look back and look in the mirror and realize all the mistakes that I made and realize that, I'm the only one that can control my destiny. So if something bad happens, there's probably some mistake that I made. So I think greed definitely played a part in it. Yeah.
And do you feel like fear has, after having gone through that period where you bought too much and maybe were a little greedy, do you think that fear of that happening again has affected your strategies?
I would say I definitely think I'm more careful now. I remember between 2006 and maybe 2013, I didn't buy any properties. I was moving around a few times. And then I remember when I bought that first property in Hawaii in 2013, I was definitely pretty nervous, but that was also with the prices in Hawaii being pretty high. But the first property we bought here was sort of like a 2-unit property, and I made sure that the rent was going to cover the mortgage if we had to couldn't cover it and we had to move back in with mom and dad or something. And even now, there's properties that I'm sort of at a position right now where I feel like I'm not actively looking right now, but I feel like there's properties that I probably could purchase, but I'm also trying to not get too crazy and let things get out of hand again. So I think I'm a little bit more careful. The other thing, I'm also a little bit older, and I feel like financially I'm in a pretty decent spot, so there's no real need for me to let things get out of control. So definitely some fear in that where you came from, and the last thing I would want would be to basically make the same mistakes and get over leveraged and have some market correction or whatever and go through the same thing again, especially now. When I went through it then, I was 30 or whatever, but now being in my mid 40s with a family, I definitely would not want to drag my family through that.
So do you, starting out your real estate career, you're kind of touching on how you were in a different mode, kind of a wealth accumulation mode, as opposed to now you're more of in a preservation mode. And what do you think kind of flipped the switch for you there because that's pretty interesting concept, that to take more risks and, while you're trying to accumulate wealth, and versus now that you've reached a decent plateau, trying to keep it is the main priority.
Right. I think, well, part of the reason when I started, I was maybe like 28 or so and single and living by myself. And I think you don't really know what you don't know. And also at that age, you're pretty reckless. I mean, I think 20-somethings tend to be a little bit reckless and you just kind of flying by the seat of your pants. And obviously there's a lot that I didn't know, but I thought I knew. So I don't think I really had everything all that well planned out. I think I was just like buying properties and I thought it was fun and was just getting caught in the wave of everybody buying properties, like a lot of people. And then when the market crashed and I had several years to obviously sit down and think about what was going on and what I needed to do. I mean, I definitely love the industry enough to make me want to start again. But I think now, I'm more mature. And then also, so I have a few properties in Hawaii, which I think are good for like wealth building, but I'm also trying to get more properties that have better cash flow numbers. I know cash flow tends to be sort of like a defense thing. As long as properties are cash flowing, then it makes it easier to hold on to properties. So I sort of have my portfolio there's some properties that are for appreciation and wealth, and then some that are more geared towards cash flow. And then I guess also in different markets, just to sort of protect against, obviously if the US market crashes, that's one thing, but in different cities tend to get affected differently as well. So I think I'm just more mature. And then also when you hear a lot of people talk about wealthy people, they say the one thing you don't want to do is lose it. It's always good to try and grow it, but they said once you lose it, that it's way harder to get it back. So I figure even if I maybe go a little bit slower, I think my main objective right now is not to like lose a lot. And I feel like I can still buy maybe a little lower price properties with better cash flow and just sort of, it's definitely more of a measured approach now, I think, than back then when I wasn't really thinking too much and just kind of going.
Yeah. So recently you said that you had started investing in some syndications. Is that part of the strategy, is to like move towards that more passive investing, or?
That's kind of what I was thinking about, just because I know I have about 25 units that are, single family and small multifamily. And obviously you guys are my property manager in Oregon, but like even for example, this year, I think we rehabbed like 3 places in Oregon and was rehabbing a bunch of places in Florida. And then when there's a lot of rehabs going on, it's just a lot to keep track of. And I think, as a lot of people say, once you get over about 20, it's just kind of hard to keep track of everything. So last year, I just joined a few syndications just to kind of see how it was going, or to see how it goes, to just try it out. And then, part of me is maybe interested in doing more of an active role in the syndication, possibly as a general partner. I'm just investing as a limited partner right now, just to kind of, see how the process works.
Nice.
Part of me is interested in getting involved as a general partner, but then I don't know how, the time issue would be. But a lot of people say that it tends to get better returns, obviously with, bigger numbers. A lot of people say it's similar to like a smaller complex, but just adding another 0 or 2. So that's.
I was going to ask, how has your experience with the syndications gone so far?
It's been going okay so far. I think the tricky part is before I kind of got into it, like one of my friends told me that you should analyze like as many deals as you can for like 6 months, and then before you like participate in a syndication. But what I found, the hard part is, I think even if there's like a great deal, if there's a bad operator, then they can screw it up, or if there's a bad deal and a good operator, I think the operator or the operators at the end of the day are going to make or break the deal. If the operator is going to screw you and run off with your money, then, what are you going to do? Even if you analyze the deal and thought all the numbers were legit, then it's hard to, they're still going to take your money. So what I did was I actually found someone locally in Hawaii he's pretty accessible, pretty accessible, meaning that he's very easy to get in contact with. We had dinner one time, and, every time you email him, he always emails back. He's on podcasts and stuff. So I I figured he's pretty out there. So I was thinking it would probably be kind of hard for him to like just disappear. But also I didn't put like a ton of money into the syndications. It's not like I put half my income in there. So I'm in like 3 syndications with him. It's not, a ton of my portfolio, but just kind of want to see how it goes with that. And then like with you guys, I spoke to you guys about one other deal, and I'll probably maybe looking to get into a couple more with some other operators and kind of just see how it goes. But like I mentioned, just not a huge portion of my portfolio in case things do go sideways. And then,
well, it's putting your cash flow and what you're bringing in back to work. Like one of the problems is like with real estate is it's not like stocks. Like if with a stock, you just like reinvest and then that money keeps churning. But once you start having income come off your properties, you got to find another place for it to go. So it keeps compounding, right?
Right. And then just with the single family and the multifamilies, like I mentioned, it's just getting hard for me to keep track of everything. So that's why I was like, well, maybe I'll try putting some syndications, which is a little bit more passive, and then it should still be generating income, but maybe take up a little bit less of my time.
That's great. That's good to hear you making that step. And I'm hopeful that it's more passive for you. Has it been easier to keep track of so far? Or?
I mean, I would say yes, but I think in general, like I was saying earlier, I'm more of a macro guy. I feel like I need someone to actually look through all the numbers, because I get the reports from the syndication every month and I get the webinars, but some months I don't watch the webinar, and I should be more involved in what's going on. But yeah.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure you got into real estate so that you can enjoy your life and do the other things, right? Like not necessarily look at the details.
Right.
Yeah.
So I figure as long as money's coming in and nothing's going sideways, then I figure things are probably okay. But I do keep everything on record in case I need to go back and look through everything.
Right.
So kind of diving back in to your strategies after the recession, like what do you think the toughest thing was about rebuilding? And, just like, and what gave you that drive to restart?
I think the hard part obviously is just getting back into it once you've been out for a few years. I think one thing that really helped is one of my good friends who also lives in Hawaii. He was buying properties, and he buys like the $25,000 properties in like Cleveland, like in pretty bad areas, but he was buying $25,000 duplexes that rent for like $1,000 a month. And he was buying a lot of properties, and he actually really got me motivated, because I was like, well, if he can do this, then I can do it. So, and he's one of my really good friends, and he's bought a bunch of them. And then he would always be telling me all these properties that he's looking at. And I think the year before I kind of got back into it, he must have bought like maybe 10 units in like Cleveland and Toledo, and I don't remember what other cities, but he definitely got me motivated again, because I was like, well, if he can do it, then I can do it. And then that's kind of how I started looking in other cities. Now, I don't buy the $25,000 properties because, even he tells me that paper, the returns are very good, but he does say there's a lot of vacancies. And he was saying a lot of times he'll ask his agent to go look at the property, and then the agent like literally won't go there, or I get property manager to manage it, and the property managers won't. They're like, we don't go to that area. And he has a lot of problems with just even getting people to go visit the properties. But I mean, he must be doing okay because he keeps buying them. But he's definitely kept me motivated, and I talk to him a lot. So we're always kind of comparing notes on. But I would say definitely having someone who also invests is a good motivator for sure.
Yeah. So you would say that being surrounded by other investors fueled your desire to get back into it?
Right. And then also listening to podcasts and, reading a lot. And I think the internet also, it makes it a lot easier to see properties online. So a lot of the properties now I buy, like obviously in different states other than Hawaii, and I've not visited them, which I should. But the way I was thinking was, the property that you guys bought for me in Portland, I had never saw that property, right? That was actually one of my best, honestly, one of my best properties. It's been great. When you guys bought for me on that 1031, it's had like so little repairs. It's been...
Well, we did the remodel.
We did the remodel on it to make it super, super slick. It shouldn't have any repairs for another 10 years.
Yeah, seriously one of my best properties, but that was also one of the motivating factors, because I was like, well, if I can buy that property, that's like literally one of the best properties. And if I can do that in Portland, I can buy it in other states as well.
You got to find good operators in other states, though.
Yeah.
Oh, they're out there. So having gone through that emotional roller coaster of the Great Recession, like, where you experienced the greed and then you like just had the loss, and then the period of time where you didn't want to invest, you were afraid of investing. What have you taken away from that? And then what can you share with everyone, how going through that experience, and if you had that 2020 hindsight, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of the interesting that I was kind of thinking about is I held on to those properties through the crash, but I also held on to them long enough. So even going through the crash, they all appreciated pretty well afterwards. I mean, I was selling properties maybe like one a year from about 2015. And I think I sold my last one, the duplex that you guys sold in 2020, but there was a fair amount of equity. So if you kind of think about it, I bought these properties at pretty much the worst time, when the market was at a peak. I didn't buy anything when the market crashed, which is when I should have bought everything, but I still ended up doing fine. I mean, these properties still appreciated. I was able to pay off other loans with these properties. I was able to sell some of those properties that were previously underwater and then buy new properties. So I would say that even though, I mean, I think time is definitely on your side, and as long as you buy things properly, even if, just kind of assume that you're going to go through some market ups and downs, but if you go in buying them properly and you're not like over leveraged, and your rents can still cover your payments and all that, then even if the market does correct, just hold it for long enough, if things are going to come back, you'll still appreciate it and you'll still do fine. So I think that's kind of what I realized, is that over time, even though I did get pretty hammered in that crash, I still ended up being fine. And like I mentioned, I bought properties all at the worst times, and it still ended up being great. I still came out. I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot now. And even though I made a lot of mistakes, it still worked out. I think that's the nice thing about real estate, is that it's fairly forgiving if you hold on to properties long enough. The property values are gonna probably always go up, over the long term, is what I would say. That kind of
definitely the get rich slow plan. So
right. A lot of people think that it's some get rich quick thing, but I think as long as you plan correctly and keep the long-term vision in mind, then you can make it through any correction.
Yeah. So, as long as you're holding your units or your properties for long enough, market timing doesn't really matter, is basically what you're saying.
That's what I think. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, and I don't know if anyone can really time the market. And then kind of like I mentioned before, there's a lot, if you listen to a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of quote unquote experts that got killed in the market crash as well. And I think there's a lot of people that will say they were buying during the crash time. They just happened to be getting started at that time, but a lot of people didn't really realize that they were buying at like the best time. I think it was more of a coincidence. I mean, obviously there's some people that knew what was happening and probably timed it, but from what I hear, it seems like most people didn't really know, and the people who got in at the right time, it was more of a coincidence than actually planned.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you think that looking back on most of your purchases, you purchased at the exact wrong time, but you were lucky in the fact that Portland was a pretty attractive market after the crash, and just holding your properties for long enough produced a pretty fantastic return, and one that, had you not invested at all, you would have been way worse off than, having gone through buying at the worst possible time and then just kind of writing it out.
Right, that's what I would say. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers on, let's say I put the money into something else, and what it could have done, I mean, that's kind of hard to calculate. But I feel like with the appreciation that I got even after the crash, like I mentioned, I was still able to pay off other properties. So I would sell one property and pay off like a loan on another property. And I was able to buy, properties in other states with basically with cash from the sale of those properties that were previously underwater. So I feel like it it put me in a pretty good spot. And then the other thing it also helped me do was, like, one of the properties I bought in Portland, I was able to use to help purchase a property in Hawaii, which was wonderful because property in Hawaii is super expensive. So,
Yeah.
a couple $100,000 from a property in Portland that was previously killing you, and now it's your down payment on a house in Hawaii. That works out pretty nicely, right?
That's incredible. Yeah, so we've got our favorite 4 questions to close up the podcast. If you could give your 25-year-old self any piece of advice, what would it be?
Okay, so I was kind of thinking about this. I would probably give my 25-year-old self probably 2 pieces of advice. So I'm about 46 now, and the first one would be to definitely maybe stop partying and drinking so much, maybe 5 instead of 45, because my wife and I kind of eliminated alcohol earlier this year, kind of around COVID, and it's amazing like how much better I feel. I have way more energy and way more focused, way more productive. And then obviously you save like so much money. I mean, last year I would have so many Uber bills because we'd be Ubering everywhere, and they're just not buying alcohol at stores. And even when you go out to dinner, our dinner bills are so much less when we're not drinking. But the other kind of part of that would be to have kids sooner, because we have a 3.5-year-old daughter right now who's pretty much has me wrapped around her finger. And I would say that spending my nights with her is far more rewarding than, the best nights I've had partying, hands down. So definitely take it easy a little bit sooner and maybe settle down and have some kids earlier.
Nice. That's
awesome.
Great advice. Next question is, what was your first entrepreneurial endeavor?
Okay, I mean, I think us as real estate investors, obviously we're all fairly entrepreneurial. I think the first thing I did was probably trying to sell things on eBay. But I also had, weird things like I was trying to sell websites for a while. I have a couple of jewelry patents. I think my problem is I'm just not very good at self-promotion. And I think the problem obviously is if you have like a super good idea, if nobody knows about it, then it's pretty worthless. So that's kind of my thing is I obviously I like to invest in real estate now, but even now I don't really openly talk to it about to a lot of people. I mean, not the friends that I know that invest, we talk about it, but I probably need to get over that hump and just be more open to people about what I do.
Yeah. So how has your formal and informal training shaped your journey?
Okay, so I would definitely need to thank my parents because they gave me every opportunity to succeed. They sent me to a very good private high school. I went to a good undergraduate school. Obviously, I went to dental school. I think going through that and working as a dentist obviously makes it relatively easy to get financing. And obviously in the real estate industry, it definitely helps. You don't need to be able to get financing, but if you have good credit and a decent income, it definitely makes financing easier to come by, which has helped. But as far as informally, obviously they don't teach a lot of real estate in school, so I had to learn all that by myself. On my own, going to seminars, podcasts. I read a lot of books, and it's kind of interesting to learn what successful people do and to try and do things that they do. Like I try to spend my time doing the more, like they say, the higher and best use of my time. So I don't really watch a lot of TV. I spend a lot less time, on ESPN and playing fantasy football, and I try to cut out most of the kind of frivolous activities. So like I'm a lot more focused when I work and get done what I need to get done. And then when I'm done working, then I can focus my energy and spend time with my daughter and not be like checking my phone and, be distracted, so I can focus more on playing with her or working out or whatever I'm doing. So I think they kind of go hand in hand. I think, learning is definitely a lifetime experience. A lifetime process. I read a lot of books now, and I think that just helps keep me motivated. And it's always good to learn and to kind of hone your habits to be more productive.
And be inspired too.
Be inspired, right, for sure.
Well, that's good. Our last question is what has been your Moby Dick of real estate? Like what's the one that got away?
I think we probably all had properties that got away because we can't buy everything. I would say probably the most recent one was actually a few months ago. My property manager in Florida brought me a pocket listing, and it was for a property that had two houses that were being rehabbed. So the houses were projected to rent for about $3,000 a month, and it was on about an acre of land. And the seller wanted $365 for it. So you can definitely get properties kind of close to the 1% rule. And I just picked up a quad in that area, maybe about a couple of months before that. And this is all when we're doing, I was rehabbing the 3 units with you guys, and I was doing some other rehabs in Florida and in Texas. So I was definitely pretty busy. So I'd sort of mentally kind of checked out that I did not want to do another deal right now. But my property manager told me to call him. So I called him, and then he was saying that on that vacant land, the seller was going to put 2 tiny homes on it that you could build for about $30,000 that would rent for about $800 a month. So if you had the 2 tiny homes at $30,000 a piece, then you'd be all in for about $425. But the rents would be about $4,600 a month. And then now I'm like, okay, that's a pretty solid deal. And considering new homes and renovated homes, it should be pretty maintenance free. But like I mentioned, I sort of mentally checked out that I didn't want to do it. So I actually handed the deal to one of my friends who jumped on it, and he had it under contract within like 2 days. But a couple weeks after that, I talked to that same friend and just asked him, well, how's the deal going? And he's like, well, actually, it's going pretty well because the seller said they could put 5 tiny homes on it. So then I'm like, okay, so now you're all in for like $515, but then that's like $7,000 of rent. And I was just like, oh, brother. And then he told me that the lender said they could probably do it with 5% finance, 5% down as like a second home. And I'm like, okay, I learned my lesson. I could have done it if I wanted to, but I mentally checked out before really even looking into it. So I would say that the lesson I learned was to definitely, especially if someone brings you a pocket listing that's not available to the public, I mean, go into it with an open mind, because I'm sure you guys know if there's a good enough deal, you'll find a way to finance it, or you'll find a way to partner with it, or partner with someone, or you'll find a way to take it down. But
that's kind of a wild deal, Gary. And then, right. So you started with 2 units, and then your guy ended up with 7.
Right. I don't know much about tiny homes, and it sounds good on paper, so I don't know exactly how it plays out, because I think he's still in escrow on it, and I talk to him pretty regularly to see how it's going, because obviously I'm like, oh, this, I kind of want to know what I'm missing out on. But yeah, it would have never crossed my mind to think of a tiny home, but apparently, you always learn something every day. So
I think you should ask for that seller's phone number and say you want the next one.
That's a great suggestion. Maybe I will. Right.
Well, Gary, it's been very fun talking with you, and we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experiences with us. And we just, really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being so open and honest, and just, being willing to kind of dive in on some of the tough times.
Thank you, guys. And anybody who's listening, these guys are my property managers in Portland, and they're excellent. They got me the best property that I have there. So anybody who's looking for a property manager in Portland, look them up. They're excellent.
Well, thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Real Estate Professionals Investing Podcast on WIN, your community for investing knowledge for growth. Please take a second to rate us so that we can get more great investors to interview. If you or someone you know wants to be on, please go to westsideinvestors.com and fill out our form.